In his book, Jewish Objections to Jesus, Michael Brown once again pushes the popular teaching and belief that Jesus was actually in heaven before he was born. You might say, okay, I see that in one real sense, Jesus makes God known, and in another real sense, he himself is divine. By that, evangelicals usually mean that Jesus is literally God. But doesn't this mean that God is somehow divided? And you never explained where this Son of God came from. The scriptures state Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. John 13:3. And he himself said to his disciples, the Father himself loves you because you have loved me and have believed that I came from God. I came from the Father and entered the world. Now I'm leaving the world and going back to the Father. John 16:27 and 28. So in this video, we will see that Jesus' words here are not truly reflective of what he actually said. This popular notion of returning or going back to heaven also appears in those following verses in some translations or paraphrases of the New Testament. A closer look to John 13 reveals that the context is to Jesus' imminent death ascension that leads to his glorification. It's all about the hour that has come, he says, to depart this world and go to the Father. And note that the same Greek word rendered I go in verses 33 and 36 is the same Greek word used in verse 3, yet the translators do not render it as such. And the wider context to John 13 is found in the previous chapter, where again the theme is about the hour that has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. And in verse 24, he gives this parable of the grain of wheat that must die in order to produce much fruit. And then the voice from heaven, obviously God speaking, I have and will glorify you. So if Jesus did say that he was returning to a previous state, to a previous place, this would not make any sense, because Jesus' glorification, as Paul tells us in Philippians 2, for example, is a first time event. He has been super exalted, as Paul calls it, to the right hand of God, a place where he was not before his birth. And then a closer look at John 16, once again, not surprisingly, reveals that it's about his imminent death ascension that leads to his glorification. It's about the hour that is coming, the promise of the Holy Spirit, and then note verses 16 and 17. The same Greek from chapter 13 is used, yet here it's rendered as simply I go, in reference to his death and eventual resurrection. Furthermore, in verse 25, Jesus says that he's speaking in figurative language. And then in verse 28, he says, I came from the Father and have come into the world, and now I'm leaving the world and going to the Father. His disciples said, now you're speaking plainly and not using figurative speech. Now, why would the apostle say that? Because it has to do with what I call the Jewish lingo of the time. Lighting his theology of the New Testament says, the earth is frequently referred to as the dwelling place of humanity in language that's paralleled in Jewish idiom, coming into the world, being in the world, departing out of the world. Note there the very verses we just looked at in John 13 and 16. The idiom itself is familiar Jewish terminology. To come into the world means merely to be born. To be in the world is to exist, and to depart from the world is to die. And he has some further examples for you to see. Now, some of this type of language can even be used today. For example, someone might refer to their birth as, well, I came into the world to do a certain job or a certain mission, or this is the purpose I came into the world. Now, you can check for yourself. There's no hint of Jesus' pre-existence, either in a pre-human form or otherwise. Can you imagine if Jesus had really said to the disciples, I'm returning to heaven, I'm going back to heaven? The many questions he would have gotten, yet We have no evidence of them ever questioning him on that point. And that's obviously because there's no verse that says Jesus went back to heaven or returned to heaven. Any lexicon will show you that the Greek words there are simply a reference to an ascension, to go away, depart, be gone, or, depending on the context, to die. Now, the majority of translations or paraphrases don't even have return or going back. John 13, verse 3, 13 times translators have opted for the return or going back language as opposed to 24 against it. So you will simply see to go. 1628, look at this, only 9 translations I found render it as return or going back against 28 that did not. And even more so for 2017, only 3 translations I found that have returning or going back, and 34 against Jesus saying that. But again, don't believe me, be a Berean and check the original languages if possible, and obviously other translations. But the warning is clear. Let's not deny God's promise, many prophecies regarding the seed of the woman who would be the descendant of Abraham, the son of David. You cannot antedate David, let alone Abraham, yet be that prophesied seed of the woman that would redeem the world. The Messiah is supposed to be, according to the Gospels, the son of Abraham, the son of David. You cannot be that if you were some pre-existing, quote, pre-human, let alone God figure before you were born.